Good afternoon, everybody. As we saw yesterday during the people hacking talk, you can use social engineering to get information about somebody. So I made it easy for you. It's all on there. So just go out there and find it so I don't have to introduce myself anymore. So why do it yourself about insider threat detection, prevention, or deterioration? So a lot of organizations do not have a big budget. They have to do things with what they have. They also want to have control over what they deploy into their networks. So they don't want necessarily black boxes into their networks being deployed. But first, let's have a look at what an insider is. So most people think that insiders are someone stealing information about a certain company. A lot of people also think that insiders are just employees of a company. But if you look at this definition of an insider, one I really like actually, is a person who has received or given the right to access, to do something, or decide about a certain asset from your organization. So if you take this definition, we can define insiders as either employees, contractors, visitors, cleaning crew, don't forget about them, and actually anybody who is trying to use or abuse your systems. You can see there compromised onto the slide. Well, whoever knows whether his employees or contractors have been compromised. So who has full control over his supply chain? Who in the room can claim that he has? That's what I thought. So insiders, these can be triggered by either social unrest, so people getting laid off or strike or whatever. They can be triggered by beliefs, so green parties or whatever, fighting against nuclear power plants, for example. But they also can be triggered by any external uncontrollable event. Let's call them sleepers. Just trusted people can quickly become untrusted because you do not have control anymore about them. So some scenarios. The thing is, you have to try to find out the goals of the insider threat actor. So often you don't know the goals. What does the threat actor tries to attain? What does he try to do? So some examples here, some employees who are abusing their former rights they were granted. So the company did not revoke their rights. So you can see that they either disabled or damaged the SCADA system, so in an energy plant and a water plant. Now, another scenario is stuff being dropped onto the network. You can see a nice little Raspberry Pi. What if that device is disguised as a printer? Will you ever detect if it's there? Will you ever detect it if it's there as a PLC? Even a Trojanized PLC, for example? Or will you ever detect a Thingbox? I don't know if you know a Thingbox. That's a network administrator wannabe troubleshooting tool. You can just drop it into your network. It connects to the cloud, by the way. You can control it by your phone. So within ICS environments, that's not really interesting, is it? Will you ever detect contractors or visitors connecting compromised laptops onto your environment? Will you detect if they plug in a USB stick, infect USB sticks? Will you detect if they deploy backdoored DSL lines onto your network? This is very often the case during revision periods. Well, they have to come on site to do maintenance work, whatever. And for easy access to their information, they just plug in an access point with or without a DSL line onto your network. But at that time, anybody else across your perimeter can try to access that access point. So, some considerations to detect, prevent, or deter. The point is that you want to detect them as quickly as possible, that you can try to do something about them, that you try to buy yourself as much time as possible. So, it has been said already several times during those 2 days, baseline your network. Do you really know how your network looks like? Do you have an inventory management? Do you have a list of all your bridge systems? Do you know from what location they connect to what location? So as in the previous talk, we already seen, that's one of the points an attacker is trying to get a hold of, to pivot into another network. Don't forget remote access paths. Often forgotten is that vendors, employees have remote access. And to make it easy for them, it's just within the VPN, if they use a VPN, any accept, because they have the same network access as being on-site. Another thing is that you have to distinguish between a visible network and an invisible network. So what is a visible network? That is a network that you think is in place. But if you look really closely, if you are chasing the cables during a physical walkthrough of your complete environment, you might find out that it's looking like this. So this is a really bad example of an actual situation which I've been doing a risk assessment on in the last month. So another problem here is the remote access is terminated onto the plant bus itself. So immediately onto the PLC networks and stuff like that. Now, what can you do about the network stuff? Of course, you can try to measure the volume, the usage of several protocols, several tools, several things. So Robert created a nice tool for that. So there's the FOSS tool. I will not explain the FOSS tool here at this time. I'll leave that up to Robert, if he still wants to do that, by the way. The big usage of a Gmail, of Dropbox, it does happen. People are uploading several amounts of data onto their Gmail, onto their Dropbox. Large print jobs. Who is looking at the large print jobs? Who is looking at somebody who is printing all the information of the plant? Who is monitoring that? Who is monitoring his DNS requests within the network? It is often the case that from within the PLC network or the process environment, DNS requests can be made to the corporate environment, from the corporate environment to the outer world. Well, it can be used as a Trojan channel as well. Even ping can be. So to solve things, you can use network authentication, and of course, you shouldn't use network segmentation and zoning with heavy, decent firewall filters in place. That's most of the time the problem. So network segmentation and zoning in the IEC 62443, there's a lot of guidance on that. But the point is here, if you do that, you should create an access matrix saying from this network zone with a certain security level, if you want to go to that certain zone with a certain security level, you have to apply this on that firewall rules. If you want to connect from the internet to the process network, it's not allowed. If you want to connect from the internet to your office environment, you have to use a VPN and stuff like that. And for increased visibility within your network, you could use honeypots, as we saw yesterday as well. Anyhow, to solve the problem of knowing what systems are connected or will connect to your network, you could use, of course, your switches, if your switches are capable of doing so. But you can also use a PI device. There's a tool called ArtWatch, which you can deploy on any given Linux system that just is monitoring every single MAC address flowing by on the network, actually, and gives an alert if there's an undetected or unknown system connected onto your network. Now, to make it a little bit more interesting here is if you put the box in a small enclosure, you can put an alarm on it. So whenever there's an alarm, whenever there's a rack door alarm, by the way, most rack servers or racks in process environments do not have any alarms on it. So you can freely open them if you are in the near area. Note this is a passive device, so no introduction of new network bridges should be occurring. There's also a little USB camera on there. Can give you nice pictures of insider attackers. Anyhow, that's not my kit, by the way. So. Now, if you have performed network zoning, well, I should go to the next slide. You should be able to deploy several of those ArtWatch probes, or whatever you call it. The difficulty is then that you have to manage the ARP databases on those devices. Then, of course, you have to have a central server who is capable of doing so. Now, The little thing is the link between those two is becoming crucial because you can use that as a backdoor, so they have to be secured as well. So for that, the proposition here is to use secure shell with a change root on this that you can only fetch the files that you need. Nothing more. Really simple. Now, that's for the network. There's another part that you have to look at when you're dealing with insiders. If the clicker wants to work. Yes. On the systems, what you can do there is create system security baselines. Now, the system security baselines, you should use them for hardening, but also for verifying if nothing has been changed. So if you have to do regular security testing on your systems, you can use those security baselines that you created to verify if nothing has been changed over time. It's not a lot of organizations who are yet doing so. Too bad, but it's still a good way of finding out if something has changed. Media sanitization techniques to prevent USB sticks, malware-affected USB sticks from being used. A good way is using a desanitization station, like there's one over here in the other room. That's one way to prevent malicious sticks to be used. Anyhow, one little catch here is that if you don't make sure that certain USB sticks can only be used on the good side, so you'll also use them on other systems, you still can get affected. And as we've seen already, you have to apply monitoring on USB usage, access rights usage, group accounts usage, command lines, and stuff like that. And you can also check for or use hashing for any PLC programs or SCADA project files or whatever, just to make sure that nothing has been changed on those files as well. And if you do so, make sure that you store those hashes onto another system that is completely isolated from your network, because hashes can be changed as well. Now, logging and monitoring. It has been mentioned already that you should do logging and monitoring, but what should you do logging and monitoring of? Well, of all your ArtWatch probes and access point probes, of every single system log file of your environment, systems, switches, firewalls, if possible, PLCs, and any honeypot that you have deployed within your network. Again, here you can use the FOSS tool as a log server, as an intrusion text server, as whatever you like it to be. Now, that was for the logical side. Another interesting thing to keep in mind is users. Do you really know your users? Do you know their work schedule? Most of the time, yes, from 8 to 4, 9 to 5, whatever. If there are shifts, they work determined hours. But the problem here is the patterns of activity, the groups and stuff like that. So if they are suddenly acting in another way than they normally do, you should be able to detect that. So it should be user monitoring. What are the log on, log off hours? If somebody suddenly logs on middle of the night, that's something which is not correct. So you should be monitoring that. If somebody is suddenly browsing to whatever websites that he should not for his job, something to look for. Internal servers that he should not access, the same. And also physical locations visited. If you only have physical perimeter protection, and you don't know where your users or your visitors or your contractors are going on your site, you might have a problem, because you do not have a clue where they actually are. So, other things HR related on users, background checks during hiring. I know I'm Belgian. In Belgium, that's illegal, actually, so but still put on the slide, because in certain countries you are possibly able to do so. But again, as we saw yesterday, social media is a pot of gold to know information about users. Use it to find out more about your users. There's a thin line between ethical and non-ethical, but yeah. Some mispromotion, some radicalization, that's all things that you have to be on the lookout for. Now, here you can see, identify your key personnel. With that, I want to say that if you do not know the persons who know almost everything of your environment, you have a problem. If there's one guy who knows everything, and he's sick, or he's out, or he's whatever, or he gets to the dark side, you have a big problem. Because you have to be able to get back to a good, working, decent situation. Yeah? Now, there's also something like governance accreditation. In Belgium, there's a security organization, governance-driven, that gives you certain clearance to access certain type of information. So it goes from NATO secret, NATO top secret, whatever. But actually, that governance accreditation takes 6 months to a year, something like that. A lot of organizations are already employing the person who is still under research. Now it's changing that they are waiting with employment until everything is okay. Who is monitoring his privileged access of his users? So the usage of administration credentials should be monitored. Who is using what administration credential on what given time? Now, the issue and the catch here within ICS environments is a lot of applications, SCADA applications, are still running as administrator rights, which is a big issue, of course. Because if you can break out that application, stumble upon the system, you have the system in your hands. Service accounts, often forgotten about. Yet, passwords are almost never changed because most passwords of the services are hard-coded, embedded into applications. It's also a pot of gold. And a lot of organizations are still forgetting this. Revoke access rights when it's no longer needed. If functions change, if roles change, the access, logical, also physical, should change together with that function. Should be an automatism, but a lot of organizations are still forgetting this. So we came to the physical stuff. So who knows, again, the physical access of employees, visitors, contractors, anybody who has an insider right? Who is revoking those physical access rights? To give you an example here, I still have a badge of a certain job I did for a governance agency in Belgium. The badge is still active. It's already 10 years ago. It still happens. Know who is where at what time, and the 4 Eyes principle. Has been mentioned in a previous talk as well. Use the 4 Eyes principle to verify what each person is doing. Of course, if you have 2 persons of the same function, that might be conflict of interest. So you have to make sure that there's no conflict of interest there. And camera detection. Give an example why this is important. In a certain nuclear power plant in Belgium, there was an incident with an oil leakage. Somebody turned open a valve so that every oil needed for a turbine was leaking away. He pulled out the lever, turned it back so it seems to be closed, resulting in the turbine running dry. It was not that good. This is an actual incident. They still not have found the culprit. Now, physical connections to DSL lines or network connections. Who of the audience is chasing his cables into his environment? Who is finding out where every single device is connected to? That's something you should be doing. So regular physical walkthroughs, not only to find out what devices you have on your site, but also to find out where they are connected to. And of course, again, rack alarms. In all these security tests, security verifications I've done in industrial control sites, I've never seen any single rack alarm yet. Too bad. They're useful. Now, something about policies. Having a paper policy is good, but if you don't support that policy with technical measures, you have some bookstand keeper on your shelf. If you don't do anything with it, if you don't take actions if somebody is violating the policy, you're not good. Then something about ICS vendor management. Who is challenging, sorry for all the vendors in the room, who is challenging the vendors on their security posture? It's part of the IEC 62443 standard, I think it's -2-4, in which there are security requirements for SCADA suppliers mentioned. It's on governance, it's on hardening, it's on password usage, it's on wireless usage, and so on. If you do not enforce your vendors to follow those security guidelines, to follow your security requirements, you can have in no way a secure device deployed into your network. So again, a little issue. And again, training and awareness. You have to train people, not only on the logical security side, so on network security, on system security, but also on the human, the social security aspect. So you have to train people to spot the out of the ordinary. So if a guy who he or she is working with is suddenly doing weird stuff, they have to dare to mention that. They have to dare to challenge those persons in what you're doing here, why you're doing this, and stuff like that. But it's within human nature. Nobody is trying to do so, but actually you should be doing this. Now, a little summary of the insider threat detection. A proactive insider threat program is mandatory, so you should be prepared to capture the bad guys, actually the good guys who turned into bad guys. And you can do so by knowing your people, knowing your assets, monitoring behavior, and investigate actions. If you don't do anything with it, you don't have an insider threat program. Now, you also have to be ready to do monitoring of every single log file you are generating. So it's also big data. If you have a large site, you have to be ready to have 1, 2, 3 full-time employees having to look at the log files. But if you don't do that, you again have nothing there. You can even throw it in the garbage bin, if you like. Now, it is possible, it is doable. I mentioned do it yourself. Is it possible to do it yourself? Yes. But you have still skilled people. You need still skilled people. You need knowledge and experience, so also you need training. You need time. You still need some budget because you have to let the people do their work. First of all, you also need management support. That's really key here. And with management support, I mean every single layer within management. Not only top management, also middle management. That's sometimes kind of a problem. And if you have a central IT department, try to get them into the OT side. Try them to understand what is the OT side about. And of course, some equipment and tools. So that's my point of view on insider threat detection. I don't know if there's still questions or other stuff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that's interesting because I believe we have been living in a time where 20 years ago, 25 years ago, insiders were a very big threat, considered to be a big threat. Then we had a growing internet connection environment, and the external threat grew on behalf of the insider threat. So would you think that we are back to having to worry more about the insider threats than before?
But I think you have to consider that the insider threat has been increasing because you are giving a lot of people rights to access your environment, either physically or logically or whatever. So I think indeed we can be back at that stage, but we have to be ready to detect those, to do something about it. So
the definition of insiders have changed as well.
Yes.
So it used to be staff members, but it can as well be consultants or facility managers or,
I showed I do not necessarily agree with that statement, so.
I think we... Okay, so we had a poll there where people were asked whether they had...
It's gone already.
knowledge of the network systems and people, and a majority of the people in this audience claim they know their environment. Do you believe them?
Well, I like to challenge them.
You can challenge them. Yeah, that's
If they
correct.
really know their environments, either logically, so network systems, but also physical and the people.
So from
Because-
your experience, what is the most common thing that you discover that people
Well,
don't know? They believe they know, but they don't.
The slide I showed you about the network layout, so people believe that it's all secure, while there's some backdoors, some jump stations in there. Another thing is that they believe they know their people, but in normal operation they might do, but during a vision, in hell no, you can know all the people who are on site at that time, because there can be hundreds, if not thousands, other people on site that you have no knowledge about, no control about.
But sometimes, I mean, from my experience in Sweden, people who are working as operators, sysadmins or whatever, they are always like, don't you trust me?
That's the
All
social
these controls, are they really necessary?
That's back to the people hacker
Back to
threat
the
of
people hack,
yesterday.
yeah.
So it's all about the human aspect. So you can fool people whatever you like. So
Yeah.
it's possible.
Yeah, but you don't want to hear that, well, yeah, I can fool you. Thank you very much. As a
Thank you.
diploma, as a token of appreciation.